Anna Iversen. We're going to talk about sprayer maintenance. If you are unfamiliar with B&G, we are an application equipment company based in the United States since 1949. And our flagship product, the Prime line, is what you see here, the sprayer. And there's lots of different models and versions of the sprayer that we produce. So there's different sizes, there's different features. But when we go over sprayer maintenance today, we'll focus on our classic 1-gallon Prime line. And I have converted my measurements within the slides to metric, which hopefully will help a little bit, as I'm going to probably reference units of measurements that we may not all be familiar with. All right, so first thing, when it comes to your compressed air sprayer, again, regardless of brand, but I'm focusing on B&G here, it's really important that we take some steps to always ensure that it is being cared for properly, even when we're not using it. And the biggest thing we can do here is store it properly. And I see a lot of times, my background is in pest management. I have about 22 years experience in pest management. We're often storing it with the pesticide inside the sprayer. And the problem with that is, depending on what formulation we're talking about, that can really do damage to the actual parts of the compressed air sprayer, to the pump assembly tube, to the siphon tube, to all the different parts that we really rely on. There's also, of course, challenges with that in terms of label requirements. And certainly in the United States, there's areas where we can't store it inside the sprayer at all without properly labeling. In the United States, I'm in the north, I'm up in Chicago. It gets very cold here. And so one of the other things I see fairly regularly is that we're taking our sprayer, not only are we storing it with liquid inside, but we're storing it outside or in our trucks. And when we get really cold temperatures, there's the very high likelihood of potential of that liquid freezing. And just like when pipes will freeze, there needs to be an escape point where the pressure builds and something needs to release. So I put some pictures here for you of where that typically is in your compressed air sprayer. And you can see the wand is where we often get those breaks. So if we are in very cold temperatures, it's really essential that we keep that Prime line or whatever sprayer we have really nice and warm per the laws that are there, right? And often that does, again, mean we need to store it empty. If it is really cold, I always recommend removing the valve. That's the part in the picture here with the handle, because those are typically the most sensitive parts to the cold and also the most expensive parts in order to fix. So if we treat that section a little bit more carefully than the rest, we're usually in a good place. When we're storing it in the truck, it should always be in a storage case or at least a bucket. And the reason for that is, if something happens and your sprayer opens up for whatever reason, maybe again it's freezing and we have some leaks, then we want to make sure that pesticide that's inside it is contained. So we always put it in a case or in a bucket. And again, ideally, we're traveling with it empty as well. As a general rule of thumb, only put the amount of chemical you need, and that's to reduce the waste, because depending on the laws in your region, we really can't keep that liquid longer than we need to. We may need to expel it out in an appropriate place per the label. And then, of course, always follow local laws. So these are the things that I see the most when I'm with our technicians in the US, but certainly these can vary by region. All right, before we get going on the most important and most likely things that we need to work on for our sprayers, I definitely want to speak to preparation. And one of the most important things we can do when preparing to maintain our sprayers is to make sure that we have the right tools and certainly the right personal protective equipment. So again, we are handling pesticides, and even though we may not be applying them at the moment, our sprayers often will still have residuals inside if we're not regularly cleaning them. So please always make sure you're wearing the appropriate gloves to handle the sprayer and the contents within it, and any other personal protective equipment you might need. And then I threw a picture here for you on the types of tools that you can expect to need when maintaining your sprayer. And again, these are the tools that certainly we will need for maintaining the B&G Prime line, but I would anticipate these same types of tools are going to be necessary for similar products out there. When we are first starting to evaluate what needs to be done with our sprayer, we're going to do a lot of inspection, right? So you've been using your sprayer regularly. You're probably very familiar with it. You may have even named it. I do run across people who name their sprayers, which is great, particularly for the B&G Prime line, because they've been around so long. And I like that because they're designed to be around for a really long time. They're designed to have a relationship with you as a technician, right? So if we're taking care of it and nurturing that relationship, then by all means, name your sprayer and have a bond with it, right? But we do need to inspect it. So even while we're using it regularly, we should be keeping an eye on the different parts. Some of these things will be really easy to see where we can immediately tell that there's a problem. A great example of that is a clogged filter. If the formulation is not coming out as we anticipate it, we know there's a problem. We know that we need to delve in a little bit and figure out what's going on. But some things will be less obvious. We may still see an result in the output that makes us question what's going on, but we may not know exactly what it is. So I always recommend that we're inspecting for any chemical residue on the parts. Sometimes we really just need a good cleaning, and we'll talk about what that looks like. Any worn or damaged fittings, certainly again, any clogged filters. We always need to make sure we're rinsing and cleaning, and this is again per label as appropriate, but each of the parts need to be rinsed and cleaned as well. So in the valve, which actually the valve is the one part we won't cover that much today because it is very specific to brand and there's a lot of parts. And so I'm going to go over the things that are a little bit more general, but for whatever valve you have, there's going to be a strainer inside, right? And this is going to capture a lot of the debris, the formulation, there can be buildup there. That typically is what we need to clean. And I'll show you how we keep that strainer clean. We're going to need to rinse and clean the tanks, right? And that is normally what most people have no problem doing. At the end of their service, at the end of their day, they'll rinse it out and call it done. It's these other steps that can sometimes take a little extra work. We do need to regularly replace a lot of parts. And this is both a pro and a con, depending on who you are and how you feel about your sort of level of comfort with sprayer maintenance. It's a pro in that, again, your sprayer is designed to have a relationship with you for years and years. So rebuilding it in the field, having those parts is expected, right? But if you're not necessarily handy, if these things can be a little overwhelming to you, this can be a scary thing. So I'm going to show you some tools here to make sure that's a little bit easier for you. But these are the list of items that we are regularly replacing on our compressed air sprayer. And that will include the nozzle. And I'll show you some slides on this, but the nozzles, just with regular routine maintenance or regular routine use, they do wear out by 10% a year. And you'll see that can really lead to an excessive amount of chemical being applied. So this is a poster here. And again, this is based in the United States. I did put a QR code here in case you're interested, but the measures of the units of measurement are, of course, for the United States. But I find this poster is really helpful, even parts details aside, to get an idea of what the prime line, and again, similar compressed air sprayers are really made of. Because if we're going to rebuild it, if we're going to maintain it and clean it, it's essential that we know what all these parts are, right? So you can see there's a lot going on here. There's the tank, which is what we see the most. We see the pump assembly, which is that tube that's going to go inside so that we can manually pump our tank. You're going to see the valve that gets attached to a hose, which connects to the tank, and then the nozzle tip at the end. So lots of little parts and details, which again, depending on who you are, can be really overwhelming. But if we know what it is we're dealing with and how we can use it, I think it's a lot easier to maintain and work on our sprayers. So these are the items I would say need the most attention, certainly for the prime line, but in any sprayer, there's going to be similar parts that need this type of attention. And I put together a little schedule for you on how often we should be checking these things. So if we're inspecting it every single day and always keeping an eye on it, that's great. But every 6 months or so, we really should plan on replacing some of these parts. And again, that's part of it. That's intended in how it was built and how it's being used so that it can last you 60 years, 50 years. We have some people with their sprayers for a very long time, which is awesome. So the check valve, the plunger cup, the lock spring, the soft seat gasket, the nozzle gasket, those we all replace every 6 months. And again, if you don't know what those words mean, that's okay. That poster will show you where on the sprayer these items are located. And then I have images for you to get an idea of how those are used. Every year or so, we're going to change the pump tube gasket and the nozzle. So plan on that. A lot of the technicians in the United States, they'll have these branch meetings where everybody will work on their sprayer. And you saw that in my cover slide, or hopefully you did, when I was trying to share my screen. There were pictures of people that were working together to work on their sprayers. And so that's the best way to do it. If we plan on every 6 months having a branch meeting where we work on our sprayers together with all the tools, all the parts, we'll ensure that our sprayers are in good condition. We do make this easy for you. So B&G makes a bulk sprayer repair kit. This is designed to have all the parts that are needed for maintaining your sprayer and ensuring that it's in working order. And there's several of each. So this is really a great option for a branch, again, for there's multiple technicians or multiple sprayers that need to be maintained. So once we have all of our parts and we have all of our PPE, our personal protection equipment, we have all of our tools, then we need to dig in a little more and deal with each part. So primeline tank cleaning is an important part. And like I said, it's usually done, but sometimes it's done incorrectly. And what I see a lot is that people will use bleach on their tanks. And I do really advise against that. So the bleach it's going to leave stains. It's going to attack the metal. We really advise just using simple soap and water. And if we're using just soap and water and a nylon brush, then really we should be able to clean out almost everything that is in that sprayer. There's probably exceptions to that, but as a general rule, there's no need to buy fancy cleaners. There's no need to buy bleach or ammonia or anything else, just soap and water, right? And that's because these are stainless steel tanks. So it's not invincible. It's certainly resistant, but there's still risk to it. So to clean the tank, I do recommend not only soap and water, but having a long nylon brush. And you can see in the picture here that the idea is we're using the soap and water inside the tank, and then we're scrubbing the inside of the tank with the brush. And we want to make sure that we get a brush that's long enough, because there's always about an ounce or so that remains, or 30 milliliters, in the tank after spraying. And so getting to that and make sure that area is clean is incredibly important. But I do advise you, if you are cleaning the tank, and of course you should, be very careful with the siphon tube. This is where a lot of our damage happens, where we're aggressively cleaning the tank and we might bend or bump or damage the siphon tube. So do be careful with that in your brush while you're cleaning it. But the idea is just really like a toilet bowl, right? You're just cleaning the outside of it, making sure that there's no residue, do a triple rinse, and have it nice and ready to go. Outside of the tank, if we're working our way up, right, we have the pump assembly, and this is a screen grab from the poster I showed earlier. These are the main parts of the pump assembly. And I will say that this is the section that typically needs the most attention outside of the valve for maintenance and repair. So again, refer to the poster if this is unfamiliar to you and you do have a prime line. But the parts of interest I've highlighted here, right? So we have the pump lock spring, the plunger cup, the pressure plate, the pump gasket, and the check valve. And all of these were in those parts list I showed earlier. Many of them were in the replace every 6 months section. And then you saw them also in the repair kit. So have these on hand and you should be able to replace them as necessary. And we'll go into a little bit detail about all of these. So this is the pump tube gasket. It's going to get constant pressure. It's going to always be used, and we're going to have that pressure on the gasket. And so over time, we'll find that it gets cracked and it may swell up. If that's the case, that's time to replace it. And so I always think it's nice when you have a group of people that are doing this and taking it apart, you can really see the level of use that it's getting. And so what may look fine to you, you look at someone else's gasket, for example, and wow, no, they're really different. Or compare it to a brand new one, and you can see that it really has taken some abuse, right? Which again is all to be expected. All of these things are repairable. That'll be one of the first things that we look at for the pump tube. The check valve is the second thing that we typically do need to replace that we have issues with. So that's that little brown disc at the bottom that sort of clips out of the pump tube. So once we've removed that, we want to take our nylon brush. And again, we don't want to have anything too damaging. So not like a wire bristle brush or anything that could really scratch the metal. Just a toothbrush is really just fine to clean up those holes at the end of the tube to make sure that everything is to transfer clearly. This is the pump tube itself, right? So if you can picture the tank, and we have the assembly that sits inside and the lid, and we have our handle to pump it. This is the actual tube which the assembly lives in. And the thing we see the most common with the tube is that we get these longitudinal cracks, like you can see in the close-up in the picture here. And this can happen and this cannot happen. It's one of those things that isn't always going to happen. If it does, it's typically because we are just seeing long-term use of insecticides. And depending on which insecticide it is, we can have an increased likelihood of the tube cracking. And again, nothing to be concerned about. It's just another part that we need to replace over time, to be expected. This is the plunger cup. So the plunger cup needs to be replaced about every 2 years or so. And with it, you can see, sorry, I was using my mouse, but you probably can't see that. With it, you will have this sort of grease and a pressure plate, and you're going to use your wrench and remove the inside of that plunger cup and replace those parts. And then you should be pretty much all set. Some of ours will have white plastic plunger cups. That typically means it's an older one and will definitely need to be replaced. And then we have leather plunger cups as well, and you can see that in the picture on the far right. And this is actually how the original B&G was made, with the leather plunger cup. And the leather's really nice because it moves over any dents that are in the tube, and so it maintains a really solid seal. So that's a great option if your tube is really beat up and has lots of dents. Using that leather plunger cup should help maintain that seal even better. This is the pump lock spring. So this is going to be replaced when you replace the plunger cup. And you can see right where that is, right at the handle. All right, so that was all the sort of the assembly and the handle, the areas that we focus the most. And again, if you don't have a prime line, if you don't have a B&G, they're probably very similar things, areas that you should focus on and be prepared to make sure that they're working properly. We'll move on to the hose. So the tank hose is nice in that it's visible, right? So we can see if there's any actual problems with it without taking apart everything. So we're going to replace it if it's cracked or damaged. Sometimes people think that they're attached with swivels, right? The two connectors at the end, those metal connectors, they actually aren't swivels. So if they're moving, that actually tells us that they need to be tightened because there could be leaks otherwise if in the hose. So we do want to tighten those. They're not designed to be swivels. We can use Teflon tape. You can see that in the picture there. Teflon tape is great to fill those narrow spaces, and it's really going to protect that metal-to-metal contact and get a much tighter, stronger seal. We have hose coils on the hose, and those are to stay put. Don't remove those. The idea is that they're protecting the hose from the constant bending that just happens during routine use when we're out using it at our accounts. And in this picture, you have the hose connection. So this is where the hose literally connects to the tank. And again, this can vary a little bit depending on the model and which one we're talking about, but it is going to connect. My big tip here, if you could take away anything, is to use 2 wrenches. So a lot of times we will see people just use 1 wrench and try to take it apart, and that can actually do some damage. We often don't get as tight a seal, but if we use our 2 wrenches, one to hold that connection and the other one to turn it, then we should be able to remove the connection pretty easily and tighten it or loosen it as needed. I mentioned earlier one of the biggest sources of problems is a strainer that is dirty. And I put some pictures here for you that are really common. I see these a lot. I saw these a lot when I was out in the field as well. And moving over to B&G, we get lots of calls and pictures where people say, what's going on? And we'll ask them to dissect their sprayer a little bit. And it's very often the strainer. So the strainer, again, designed to catch anything that could otherwise, anything in the formulation that isn't mixed well and build up over time. The strainer is designed to catch that to protect the rest of the system. So the result is that it does need to be cleaned fairly often. Not hard to do. You can see, again, we just clean it with our soap and water and our nylon brush. If we can't get it clean, if we have a lot of rust or too much debris to get off there, as you can see in the picture on the right, then absolutely just replace it. It's just another part that we can have ready to go and replace as needed. When we're putting it back together though, do be mindful of which direction the strainer goes. I have this picture on the left for you. We have the valve on the left side and the hose on the right. That screen strainer goes in between them, but the closed end has to face the hose. So this is another common mistake where someone has done the right thing and has cleaned it, which is great. We encourage that, but then puts it in backwards. And so that's going to make it so that we don't have the throughput that we'd like. Sometimes we still will have some, but it won't be what is expected. Nozzle replacement is so important. I think we tend to think the nozzles will last forever, and they just won't, right? So this is the nozzle or the tip for the typical B&G sprayer, the prime line. And just over regular use, because of the metal and the insecticides that we're using, we do see this wear. Just even if it was water pushing through here, over time, we're going to increase those openings just a little bit. And those increased openings are going to do a couple things. It's going to allow more liquid to come through. Important for us to be aware of that, because when we are putting out our formulations, we're obviously applying it per the label. And if we assume that we're putting out a certain amount, but we're actually putting out much more, this could be an over application, which we never want to do with our chemicals, of course. But we've seen just with normal use, we can see an increase of 10%. And lots of studies have been done on this, which is pretty cool, over at Virginia Tech, where just regular use, we see that there's this increase. And so not only are we putting extra liquid out, we're wasting money, and we could have potential violations due to that. I do want to emphasize that we're only going to use a nylon brush. So I see the three things on the right all the time. I see toothpicks and paper clips and safety pins being used to poke at the strainer and the nozzle and to clean it out. And don't do that. The metal is too malleable for that. And so we'll really end up just damaging it. And we could actually produce even a worse spray than originally intended by doing that, where it's just going lots of different directions. And that's because we've ruined the flow pattern of it. The nozzle gasket. So this is right here. The little black gasket there goes in there. Sorry, it should say seals opening nozzle. So it will leak without it. So we need to make sure that's there. This is another one I see missing a lot. It will fall out if we're playing with our nozzle. So make sure that's there. Otherwise it will leak straight from the nozzle. And then the soft seat gasket, the photo there for you is to show that the flat side is going towards the nozzle. And then in the drawing, I again want to point out the benefits of using 2 wrenches as you're working with things, one to hold and one to turn, to make sure that we're able to remove things appropriately. All right, that was the highlights, the overviews of how we keep our sprayer clean and maintained. It's ready to go. And again, it will really vary by which model and which brand you have. But if you are aware of the different parts and the steps that are needed to maintain it, I hope that's helpful for you to prepare for that. In summary, I always advise keep your sprayer empty, especially in your really cold regions in the winter. Certainly keep it clean, follow the labels always, and then rinse it out with soap and water and make sure that everything is clean in there. And that's beyond just the tank, that's the parts of it as well. Regularly inspect those parts, take time to get to know your sprayer, especially if you're daunted by it or a little overwhelmed by it. Take it apart and get familiar with it. It's designed for that. You're not going to break it. You're only going to learn from it. And there's lots of great tools out there. There's the poster I showed. There's several videos that are available online. You can go to B&G's website if you'd like to and look at different troubleshooting videos and different repair videos. And then there's just lots of information in general in terms of people resources as well, because the sprayer's been around for so long. Lots of people do know how to do this and are there to help. Make sure you have the PPE, the tools, the parts, and again, the poster or any resources handy. That'll make your life a lot easier. I do recommend you do it like you see in this picture at a table where you have all your tools ready to go, as opposed to doing it on the floor or in the truck. That is where parts get lost and you chase after a missing gasket down the street. Make sure you're following the schedule. So replace the parts based on use, certainly as needed, but also just based on the schedule. And then remember that the sprayer is designed to work for you for years, right? For years and years. It's not a one-time purchase that you then toss, say, 2-3 years later. Certainly, at least not the B&G Prime line. So do take care of it and make sure that you're ready and able to maintain it. All right, with that, if there's any questions, I'm glad to answer them.